Hello, welcome to my sewing studio. My name is Anna of Anna Allen Clothing, and today I'm going to walk you through how I draft a pair of Selvedge jeans using my Pomona Pants Kids Pattern. I'm going to be making the size 3, which is the size my son is right now. He's 3 years old, and these will be elastic waist, just like the Pomona Pants, and the front fly will be a faux fly. I'm gonna use this book called Fashion Pattern Making Techniques for Children's Clothing. So I like page 84, if you have this book, is the one I'm going to be using as just my guide when I'm going through all the steps. If you want to work on a different size and you're kind of confused about some measurement I'm using, just feel free to leave me a comment and I'm happy to figure out like what measurement you might need. And yeah, I will see you hopefully soon in the next video. These instructions will show how to turn the Pomona Pants Kids Pattern size 3 into a pair of elastic waist Selvedge jeans. Get out some tracing paper and place it over the Pomona Pants Kids Pattern. I like to use medical exam tissue paper as it's inexpensive and perfect for tracing patterns. Put a few weights around the pattern so it doesn't shift while you work. I am using the book Fashion Pattern Making Techniques for Children's Clothing as a guide for drafting these jeans. The side seam is drawn 1/2 inch to the front of the grain line side body line. These jeans will have a separate sew-on waistband, so we need to mark the fold line on the pattern. Continue tracing the pattern. The Pomona Pants View A have a wide leg, so to create a straight leg, I removed 1 inch on either side of the inseam, making a total of 2 inches removed from the hem circumference. I also lengthened the jeans by 3 inches for a generous cuff. I actually lengthened an extra 1 inch when I cut out the fabric later on. A hip curve ruler will help you make a clean inseam line from the crotch to the hem, but you can also eyeball this if you don't have a hip curve. Since I will be sewing on a waistband that is 1 1/4 inches wide, I lowered the waist at the waistband fold line by 1 1/4 inches. For these jeans, I will be making a faux fly. The fly shape will be about 1 1/4 inches wide. Mark the fly 4 3/4 inches long. The bottom of the fly will be slightly narrower at about 1 inch wide. Create a curve shape at the bottom of the fly. You can use a spool of thread if you need help drawing a curve. I went ahead and added 1/2 inch seam allowance to the top edge of the jeans, although normally I would wait to add all the seam allowances until after I have drafted the pattern. Fold the center front of the tissue paper back so you can trace the fly shape. Add 1/4 inch along the fly edge. Here I traced the back pocket placement, but later ended up lowering the back pocket by 3/4 inch to make room for the back yoke. I also moved the back pocket towards the back by 1/2 inch. To create the back yoke, starting at the side seam, mark a line 1 1/2 inches from the top waist edge. Then mark another line at the center back 2 1/2 inches from the top waist edge. Connect both lines by drawing a line from the bottom of the first line to the bottom of the second line to create the back yoke. To draw the front curved pocket, measure and mark 3 1/2 inches from the side seam line towards the front. At the top waist edge of the side seam, mark a line 2 1/2 inches. Continue these lines as they intersect and start to form the front pocket shape. Create a curve where the 2 points intersect. You may need help by using a round object, like the bottom of a cup, to help create the curve, or you can just eyeball it like I did. For the back patch pocket, we will use the pattern piece included in the Pomona pants, but alter it so it has a point at the bottom of the pocket. To create the point, fold the pocket pattern in half lengthwise and mark the center. Measure up from the bottom of the pocket on either side by 1 inch. Draw a line from the 1 inch mark to the bottom of the pocket center and repeat for the other side. I forgot to draft the pocket bag for the front pockets until after I started tracing the pants and adding seam allowances, so we will do that later. Now it's time to trace the pattern you created onto a separate piece of tissue paper. You will be adding the seam allowances to the pattern pieces as you trace. Start by marking a long straight line on one edge of the paper, then add 1/2 inch seam allowance to this line for the side seam of one leg. Match it up with the front leg side seam and start tracing. Add 1/2 inch seam allowance to the front curved pocket. If you haven't already, add 1/2 inch to the top edge of the jeans for the waistband seam allowance. Trace the faux fly as well as marking the fly top stitching. Remember to mark the center front fold line. The leg inseam already has seam allowance included, so no need to add that here. On the pattern piece, write down front jeans, 1/2 inch seam, size, cut 2. I forgot to draft the pocket bag and the pocket bearer, so we will do that now. To draft the pocket bag, mark a line about 1 inch from the front edge of the curved pocket. Mark another line from the bottom of the front pocket about 4.5 inches. You can keep the pocket squared or you can curve it like I have done here. Next, we need to create the pocket bearer. This is the piece of fabric underneath the front curved pocket, and it's usually cut out of the same fabric as the jeans. Measure about 1 inch below the front curved pocket to create a curve at the edge. The grain line for the pocket bearer is usually horizontal. The grain line for the pocket bag is vertical. The pocket bag will be folded, so take a piece of tissue paper and fold it in half. Place the folded edge of tissue paper as shown here. I decided to redraft the pocket bag to make it a little wider at the bottom. Trace the pocket bag onto the folded tissue paper. Add 1/2 inch for the side seam. Add 1/2 inch seam allowance to the waist edge. Trace the pocket bearer line on one side, then open up the tissue paper. Trace the front curved pocket, including seam allowance, onto the other side. Mark fold line and vertical grain line. On the pattern piece, write pocket bag, 1/2 inch seam, cut 2. Trace the pocket bearer onto tracing paper. Make sure to include 1/2 inch seam allowance at the top edge. The curved edge does not need a seam allowance as it will be finished with a serger or zigzag stitch. Draw a horizontal grain line on the pattern piece right, pocket bare, cut 2. Trace the back leg by marking a line along one edge of your tracing paper and then adding 1/2 inch for the seam allowance. Starting at the top edge of the jeans at the bottom edge of the back yoke, add 1/2 inch seam allowance to the top edge. Trace along center back, the leg, and hem. Seam allowances already included here. Mark pocket placement and vertical grain line on the pattern piece right back, 1/2 inch seam size, cut 2. Start tracing the back yoke. Add 1/2 inch seam allowance to the side seam, top waist edge, and bottom edge. The center back already has 1/2 inch included. Mark horizontal grain line. On the pattern piece right back yoke, 1/2 inch seam, size, and cut 2. Trace back pocket and vertical grain line. On the pattern piece right back pocket, 1/2 inch seam, size, cut 2. Draft the waistband. Draw a straight line along your tracing paper. Fold the paper in half lengthwise and match it up with the waist edge of the pattern to determine the length. Draw another line down from the first line, 1/2 inches for the waist seam allowance. Draw another line 1/2 inch down from the first line for the waist seam allowance. The waistband will be 1 1/4 inches wide, so the pattern needs to be double this. It will be folded lengthwise, plus seam allowance, making it 3 1/2 inches wide with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Not shown here, but I added an extra 2 inches length just in case I did the math wrong or needed a little extra. Mark the fold line and the horizontal grain line. On the pattern piece, write waistband, 1/2 inch seam, size, cut 1. For the double front knee, draw a line that measures about 5 inches from the hem. You may need to make your knee patch longer or shorter depending on how tall your child is. Draw a parallel line 1 inch away from the side seam and about 12 inches long. A double front knee is usually sewn into the leg side seam, but for this version, I decided to leave it out. Next, mark a line along the inseam about 1 1/4 inches away from the edge and stop a few inches before you reach the crotch point. Draw a curve that mirrors the crotch curve about 2 inches away from the edge. Draw a horizontal line at the top to finish the knee patch. Add 1/2 inch seam allowance to all sides. Next, we are going to draft the coin pocket. On the pocket bag, draw the 1/2 inch seam allowances to visualize where to place the pocket and how large to make it. Draw a 2 by 2 inch square and then create a point at the bottom by measuring 1/2 inch up from each corner and marking the center point. Add 1/2 inch seam allowance on all sides of the coin pocket. On the pattern piece, write down coin pocket 1/2 inch seam, size, cut 1. Trace the double front knee patch onto tissue paper. Mark vertical grain line onto knee patch. On the pattern piece, write down double front knee, 1/2 inch seam, size, cut 2. Mark a 3 inch opening at the center of the hem. This area needs to be left open when you stitch the knee patch to the pants. I hope you enjoyed following along while I drafted jeans out of the Pomona Pants Kids pattern. I realize this is more of an advanced tutorial, and if I left something out or you're confused by anything, please feel free to comment below. The next video will be part 2, where I will show you how to sew these Pomona Pants jeans.